This is roots, where movement becomes memory. There are journeys taken to arrive somewhere, and others taken because nobody is ready to go home yet. After Dad's funeral in Beaufort West, and later after the unveiling of his tombstone, the family followed another ritual, one that was never formally announced, but somehow always happened. As evening settled, we would pile into a kombi and drive out toward the Nieuveld Mountains. No destination, no itinerary, no urgency, just movement again. By then, the difficult part of the day was already behind us. The formalities, the speeches, the handshakes, the emotional exhaustion that follows grief when people have spent an entire day trying to remain composed for one another. And so, as the sun lowered itself into the Karoo, the road carried us away from people and back toward landscape. The mountains changed color slowly, brown becoming copper, copper becoming shadow. The air cooling almost imperceptibly through the open windows. Conversation softened there, not because sadness disappeared, but because the mountains made noise feel unnecessary. The adults pointed things out as we drove. Old farm roads, places where family once worked, people who once lived somewhere now reduced to names attached to land. And then, untaught, would begin naming plants. Some roadside herb most of us would never have noticed without her. Plants gathered during childhood. Medicinal uses remembered from another generation. Which leaves soothed fevers, which roots settled stomachs, which plants people trusted long before pharmacies and packaged medicine reached towns consistently. She spoke about them casually, not like lessons, simply memory continuing out loud. Looking back now, I realize how much knowledge disappears quietly when older people leave. Not dramatic knowledge, not official knowledge, just ordinary remembering. The kind carried through repetition, through use, through someone pointing out a plant beside a gravel road at sunset. As children, we rarely understood these drives as healing. We thought we were simply going for a ride. But adults understand movement differently after loss. Sometimes sitting inside a house becomes too heavy. Sometimes grief needs horizon. The Karoo has a strange relationship with silence. It does not feel empty there. It feels spacious enough for thought to settle. At some point during those drives, laughter would slowly begin returning. Not loudly at first, just small interruptions in sadness. Someone remembering a story, someone correcting another version of it, someone laughing unexpectedly at something Dad once said. And gradually, the emotional weight of the earlier day would loosen. Not disappear, never disappear. Just become easier to carry together. By the time we returned after sunset, another ritual was already waiting. The braai. People gathering around firelight. Voices overlapping again. Children moving between adults. Plates balancing on laps. Smoke drifting into cold Karoo air. Food has a strange role at funerals. People insist you eat when nobody feels hungry. Tea appears constantly. Meat is prepared, bread passed around, as though ordinary acts can slowly guide people back toward living again. And perhaps they can. What I remember most from those evenings is not grief itself, but the transition afterward. Watching family move from mourning into storytelling, from silence into memory, from heaviness into warmth. That may be one of the quietest forms of love. People helping one another to ordinary life without ever announcing that they are doing so. The older I become, the more I realize families survive through rituals nobody's written down. The evening drives, the braais, the checking in, the retelling of stories everyone already knows, the insistence that nobody sits alone too long. Later, when our anchor's voice itself had fallen silent, we returned to the mountains in the same way once more. This time after Antot's funeral. She was laid to rest beside Dad, her nephew by family line, but in life something much closer than a brother. Growing up so near in age, they moved through the world less like aunt and nephew and more like siblings who had shared the same emotional ground. And again, as evening settled across Beaufort West, movement became part of mourning. The kombi, the road, the fading light across Nieuveld, the familiar gathering of family trying to steady itself after loss. And now the voice naming plants beside the roadside was missing. And somehow, because of that silence, her presence felt even larger. That is what happens with people who quietly hold families together. Only after they are gone do you fully understand how much emotional weight they had been carrying for everybody else. It was known that Antort loved to be home. Everyone visited her there. When she traveled anywhere, it was usually with her children and their families. Family joked that she would travel around the table. Invitations would be accepted warmly and then quietly abandoned. And yet, there were moments when she surprised us. She traveled to Cape Town for Chantal's wedding in the same year Dad passed away. She knew how much he had looked forward to that milestone. And somehow, with her presence there, it felt as though she had come to bear witness on his behalf too. Another rare journey came later when her grandson Ashley announced his engagement to Samantha. Again, she traveled south. Again, she insisted on staying with Mom. I remember taking long drives around the peninsula with her. Cape Point, open sea, cloud shadows across mountains, roads Dad himself had loved. The stairs were too daunting for her by then, but she watched everything carefully, quietly, absorbing. I have photographs from that visit, rare photographs, because Dad, Antort, and the whole clan are never particularly fond of cameras. But I was always the one carrying one, always aware that ordinary moments quietly become history while nobody notices. Looking through those photos now, what strikes me most is how much she reminded me of Dad. The same face, the same hands, the same slow walk with hands folded behind their back. Both able to drift into a world of thought while standing silently beside everyone else. And perhaps that resemblance explains something deeper too. Why losing her felt strangely like losing an echo of him all over again. But the road remained. The ritual remained. The mountains remained. And somewhere inside the repetition of those familiar movements, so did they. Perhaps that is why Beaufort West remains emotionally fixed for so many of us. Not because tragedy happened there, not because funerals gathered people there, but because the rhythm itself became part of the family rhythm. The road into the Nieuveld Mountains, was never spectacular in the way tourists describe landscapes. There were not dramatic destinations, no carefully planned viewpoints, just fading light, dust, quiet roads, and a kombi carrying people trying to find equilibrium again. But sometimes healing does not arrive through revelation. Sometimes it arrives through repetition, through familiar people, familiar roads, familiar mountains, through someone beside you quietly naming plants while the last light disappears across the Karoo. This is Roots. Some journeys are not about reaching somewhere new, but about finding your way back to one another. Look again.